something happened quietly in Japan that most people missed. Toyota, the company that invented the Prius, that turned hybrid cars mainstream, that spent 30 years playing it safe, just made a move that nobody saw coming. They announced a car that runs on water, not a concept, not a patent filing buried in a press release. A real vehicle, with real engineering behind it, that uses water as its primary fuel source. And the moment that news hit, two things happened simultaneously. The internet exploded with excitement, and physicists started shaking their heads. Because here's what nobody is telling you up front. Every single time someone has claimed to build a car that runs on water, and this has happened more times than you'd think, the story ended the same way. Fraud charges, jail time, embarrassment, every single time. So the question isn't just whether Toyota's water engine works. The question is whether Toyota just made the most important breakthrough in automotive history, or whether they're about to repeat the most embarrassing pattern in the history of clean energy. And to understand why that question matters more than anything right now, you need to go back. Way back before Toyota, before Tesla, before any of this, because the dream of a car that runs on water didn't start in a Toyota lab. It started with a man named Stanley Meyer in the 1980s. In rural Ohio, Meyer claimed he'd built a dune buggy, nothing fancy, just a simple off-road vehicle that ran entirely on water. He said he'd cracked something fundamental, that he'd found a way to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, so efficiently that the energy released was greater than the energy put in. Scientists called it impossible. Meyer called them wrong. He toured the country. He gave demonstrations. He got on television. People believed him because he seemed to believe himself. And then in 1996, a court found him guilty of fraud. 2 years later, he died under circumstances that his supporters still call suspicious, and that medical examiners called a brain aneurysm. But the dream didn't die with him. In 2006, a company called Genesis World Energy raised millions from investors with the same promise, a device that could pull usable energy directly from water. No fuel, no grid, just water. Their CEO, Patrick Kelly, gave confident interviews. Investors wrote confident checks. And then the cars never arrived. Kelly went to prison. The money was gone. In 2008, the same year Toyota was quietly beginning its hydrogen research. A man from Sri Lanka named Tushara Rialit claimed he'd driven 190 miles on just 3 liters of water. The country's prime minister publicly endorsed him. Newspapers ran the story globally, and within months, Rialit was arrested. It was fiction, start to finish. Then, in 2022, an Indonesian man named Ariano Makul unveiled something he called the Nakaba, a device he claimed could power a motorcycle for 500 kilometers on a single liter of water. He said Lamborghini was interested. He said Ferrari had called. Indonesian scientists reviewed the device and said it violated the basic laws of thermodynamics. Lamborghini and Ferrari said they'd never heard of him. So by the time Toyota made their announcement, there was already a graveyard. A long, embarrassing, fraud-filled graveyard of water, car promises. And that graveyard is exactly why what Toyota is doing is either genuinely historic or genuinely reckless. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because Toyota isn't claiming what Meyer claimed. They're not claiming free energy. They're not saying water magically produces more power than it takes to split it. That would break physics, and Toyota's engineers know exactly where the line is. What they're actually saying is different, more careful, and in some ways, more interesting. Their system uses a process called electrolysis, running an electrical current through water to separate it into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen is then fed into an engine that burns it cleanly, releasing energy and producing nothing but water vapor as exhaust. The electricity needed to run the electrolysis comes from an external renewable source: solar, wind, hydro. So the car doesn't run on water the way the fraudsters claimed. Water isn't the energy source. Water is the carrier, the medium. The way that clean energy gets stored and transported in a form that can power a vehicle, that distinction sounds subtle. It isn't. It's the difference between a magic trick and an engineering solution. And Toyota has been building toward this for a long time. Since the early 1990s, they've been filing hydrogen patents, over 5,000 of them now, covering everything from fuel cell stack design to high-pressure storage to thermal management in sub-zero temperatures. In 2014, they launched the Mirai, which means future in Japanese, the world's first mass-produced hydrogen fuel cell car. It refuels in 5 minutes. It drives over 300 miles on a single tank. It emits nothing but water vapor. The Mirai exists. You can buy one. That's not a rumor. That's a product. So when Toyota says they're building on that foundation with a new water-based propulsion system, the starting point is completely different from Meyer's dune buggy or Riolet's 3-liter claim. The starting point is a decade of real hydrogen vehicles already on real roads. But here's what that still doesn't answer. And this is the part that should make you pause. The real competition isn't between Toyota's water engine and gasoline. That war is already over. The real competition is between hydrogen and lithium. Between Toyota's bet and Elon Musk's bet, between two completely different visions of what clean transportation looks like, and only one of them is going to win. Right now, the battery electric vehicle is winning. Not slightly winning, dominantly winning. China has built the largest EV market in human history. BYD alone sold more electric cars than Tesla last year. The charging infrastructure is expanding faster than any grid of hydrogen stations ever has. Governments are subsidizing battery production. Factories are scaling. Costs are falling. And here's the brutal physics problem that sits at the center of Toyota's plan, the one their announcement didn't lead with: the well-to-wheel efficiency of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, meaning the total energy efficiency from the moment you generate the electricity to the moment the wheels turn, sits at around 60 to Wuling%. That sounds reasonable until you compare it to a battery electric vehicle, which operates at roughly 85 to 90% efficiency along the same chain. That gap isn't trivial. It means that for every unit of renewable energy you produce, a hydrogen car wastes almost twice as much of it as a battery car does. In a world where clean energy is still expensive and still limited, that's a serious problem. Toyota knows this. Their engineers are not naive. And so their entire 2030 strategy is built around one core assumption: that the cost of producing green hydrogen will fall fast enough, and the infrastructure will grow dense enough that the efficiency gap stops mattering. They're projecting a 50% reduction in fuel cell stack costs. They're opening a dedicated hydrogen manufacturing facility in July 2024 to centralize development, production, and commercial operations under one roof. They're partnering with Mitsubishi, Coca-Cola, and regional energy companies to build out localized hydrogen supply chains. In Thailand, they're converting chicken manure and food waste into biogas to produce hydrogen. They're targeting 200,000 units sold by 2030, at which point they believe economies of scale take over and the economics flip. That's not a fantasy roadmap. That's a detailed industrial strategy with named partners, specific cost targets, and a physical factory already under construction. But it only works if the world builds the fueling infrastructure fast enough. And right now, hydrogen stations are rare. In most countries, they're almost non-existent. You can drive a Tesla from Los Angeles to New York and charge it everywhere. You cannot do the same in a Mirai. That infrastructure gap is the reason most analysts give the advantage to batteries. And it's the reason Toyota's announcement landed differently depending on who was listening. To EV investors, it sounded like denial. To energy researchers, it sounded like a long game. The question is, which one is right? And then there's the layer of this story that nobody in the mainstream coverage wanted to touch: the conspiracy layer. The fossil fuel industry generates trillions of dollars annually. A genuine, scalable, water-based transportation system, whether hydrogen or battery, represents an existential threat to that revenue. Not a competitive threat, an existential one. Now, there's no documented proof of a coordinated campaign to suppress hydrogen technology specifically. That's worth saying clearly. But there is documented history of fossil fuel companies funding misinformation around climate science. There is documented history of lobbying against renewable energy infrastructure. And there is a strange coincidence worth noting. Every time a legitimate hydrogen breakthrough gets close to mainstream attention, the conversation gets contaminated by a new fraudster, making wild claims that collapse publicly and take the credibility of the entire concept down with them: Meyer, Kelly, Riolet, McCool, each one arriving at a moment when hydrogen was gaining momentum, each one setting the conversation back years. Whether that's coordination or just the predictable behavior of opportunists chasing a hot topic, That's a question worth sitting with, because Toyota is now walking directly into that legacy. They're making a hydrogen announcement in a world that has been trained repeatedly to hear water car and think scam.